Hey everybody, welcome to the What is Money Show. I am thrilled to have you here joining me on my mission to help shine light on the corruption of money. Now, if this is your first time listening to the What is Money Show, I strongly recommend that you go back to episodes 1 through 9 first, which lays a lot of the groundwork for many of the concepts that we explore on the show. These first 9 episodes are my series with Michael Saylor, and thousands of people have told me that this is the best podcast series they've ever heard, hands down, and that it was instrumental to their understanding of money and Bitcoin. So if you're looking to start a deep dive into the nature of money, I don't think there's any place better that you can start other than episode 1 of this show. Now, a little bit about this show and how it makes money. The What is Money Show is 100% sponsor based. So all of our revenues are derived from direct sponsorships. And I strive to be very selective about the sponsors that I work with, specifically only using sponsors that I use personally, and also choosing sponsors that have values which are well aligned to the values expressed on this show, such as freedom, education, self-sovereignty, etc. So what I'm going to do now is a few ad reads right at the top of the show, and then I'll do a few more ad reads in the middle. And I hope you'll take the time to listen to them, as again, these are hand-selected sponsors, and I think you'll like what they have to offer. Today's podcast is brought to you by In Wolf's Clothing. Wolf is the first startup accelerator dedicated exclusively to the Bitcoin Lightning Network. 4 times per year, Wolf brings teams from around the world to New York City to work with like-minded entrepreneurs, pushing the boundaries of what's possible with Bitcoin and Lightning. The program is designed to help early-stage companies achieve product-market fit, develop their brand, secure early-stage funding, and grow businesses that help fuel the global adoption of Bitcoin. So go to wolfnyc.com to learn more about the program or apply. Again, that's Wolf NYC, WOLFNYC.com. Scott Horton, welcome to the What is Money Show.
Happy to be here.
Very nice to have you. It's been a long time coming. I think we connected on Twitter, and I'm a big fan of a lot of your posts, a lot of the work that you've done. Just by way of quick introduction, you are the host of the Scott Horton Show. I think you said you guys have done over 6,000 interviews.
Yep.
That's a lot. You're also the director of the Libertarian Institute and the editorial director of Antiwar.com.
Yep.
Very cool stuff. So we're going to talk about a number of things today. I think just your libertarian or anarcho-capitalist views on the world, many of which I think I share. But before we get into that, you're writing a book right now. Could you tell us a little bit, it's not your first book, so maybe you could tell us a little bit about your previous books and the current book you're working on.
Mm-hmm. Okay, so my first book was Fool's Errand, Time to End the War in Afghanistan. And that actually started as my second book, Enough Already, Time to End the War on Terrorism. But what happened was I got bogged down on chapter 2 about Afghanistan. And it got so long, I thought, well, what the hell? I guess I'm writing a whole book about Afghanistan now. So I went ahead and did that. And then I went back to the drawing board and started again. And this time I kept chapter 2 at a chapter length, and I went on. And so Enough Already is basically all our Middle East wars from Jimmy Carter all the way through Trump. So the Iranian Revolution, the Iran-Iraq War, the 80s Afghan War, Iraq War 1, the sanctions and blockade, Iraq War 1.5, I call it, at the 1990s. And then, of course, the terrorist war against the United States and America's support for, and then war against the terrorists, and then Afghanistan, Iraq, Somalia, Libya, Syria, Yemen, and who did I leave out? Pakistan and Mali, and the whole damn terror war there in Enough Already. And then I have a couple of books that are transcripts from my show. One of them is The Great Ron Paul, which is 29 interviews of Dr. Paul that I did from 2004 through 2019. And then also the transcript of a speech I gave about how much I love the guy. And then the next one is called Hotter Than the Sun, Time to Abolish Nuclear Weapons. And it's actually all about all aspects of nuclear weapons and all the different nuclear weapon states and the threshold states and all their nuclear programs. And then Hiroshima and Nagasaki, the military industrial complex, and whatever you got, all about that. And I have to say, I mean, even though I'm in it and it gets a little tedious reading me in every interview when it's all these different interviews of all these different experts, but still, like for a book of interviews about anything, I think that's really a great one, on all different aspects of, America and all of our allies and all of our enemies' nuclear programs, Israel and China and North Korea and just every kind of thing in there, all the accusations against Iran and all that. So if you really are interested in nuclear weapons, that's a great one too, Hotter Than the Sun. And then right now I'm working on Provoked, how Washington started the new Cold War with Russia and the catastrophe in Ukraine. And you probably remember a couple of years ago, they said unprovoked attack, unprovoked attack, unprovoked attack, which is the most obvious tell in the world, that they're just trying to get you to like feel funny if you question how it might have been provoked. Oh, gee, I wouldn't want to go there. It must not have been provoked in any way. Or other people are going to look at me funny if I say that it was, since the consensus is that it definitely wasn't. Or what, I guess that's the point of the repetition behind that. But of course, what's the truth? The truth is, as everyone knows, as everyone on your block knows, the Soviet Union used to be an empire, and then it fell apart. There used to be two superpowers. Now there's one superpower, and it ain't them, it's us. And we know that Bill Clinton and George Bush and Barack Obama and the likes of them, Donald Trump for that matter, continued the policy. And with Joe Biden and John McCain in the Senate cheering them on the whole time for 30 years going back, they're the ones calling the shots. Men that we all know are the worst and dumbest decision makers, the worst stewards of American power that we could have possibly had over the last 30 years. Of course they provoked it. And they knew what they were doing, and they'd been warned 1,000 times. You can't get your military alliance this close to a threshold major power state like Russia without provoking a conflict. And hell, they use those exact words themselves for years. Well, we got to be careful we don't provoke them by going too far too fast here, and the likes of that. Everybody knows. And so that's the background to the new Cold War with Russia. America started it almost as soon as the old one was over by pushing their luck, the American empire, that is, our national security state. And leading to, so far, culminating in the absolutely horrific catastrophe in Ukraine over the last 2 years, really over the last, 9. But it's, that's what it's about. It's already, the book is about, 1,225 pages long, because I can't quite wrap it up. Because once I get to blaming Bill Clinton for things, it's hard to rein me in, man. But I'm working on, I got to finish it, and then I got to pare it down badly with a hatchet and get it down to some kind of reasonable length for you, which is, I'm not quite there yet. I'm still working on the research for it, but it's got almost 4,000 footnotes, 3,800 something footnotes so far, many of those with multiple citations. And it's 1,200 and something pages. And I don't know what can I say, man? It's not done yet.
That's awesome, man. Yeah, when I start writing too, it tends to run long, and then I have to take the hatchet to it at the end. But that is really, really long. So good on you for doing that. So this whole unprovoked thing, we talk about these statist inversions often on the show, where like a piece of legislation is called one thing, but if you just invert the meaning, that's what it really is typically. And then the mainstream media brainwashing through repetition, like that seems to be part of the program, so to speak. What was the actual motivation for the provocation of Russia? Like, what did we stand to gain by provoking them?
Well, from your point of view and my point of view, nothing. From the point of view of the American empire, is an opportunity to weaken Russia, to lure them into a trap. And of course, America's paying far more than the Russians, and although they're losing a lot more lives, but in terms of billions, the Americans are the most profligate spenders when it comes to war. So they're just blowing money.
Yeah.
And they claim they're bogging the Russians down, providing them a strategic defeat, but that's just not true. I mean, when the thing started out, well, I'll have to sum this up for you, but America did a coup in 2014. And when the people of the Far East, yes, led by Russian agents, but still with a lot of consensus too, declared independence, or at least declared, that's not even right. They declared autonomy and essentially refused to accept the rule of the new coup junta, the American-backed coup junta. They attacked them and called it the war on terrorism and waged a war against them. And that war went on. Really, it was bad for the first year. It was very bad for the first year. Like something like 10,000 people were killed. And then they had these two peace deals called the Minsk deals that reduced the level of violence by withdrawing heavy weapons and that kind of thing, drawing a stasis line, basically. There's still what they call low-level fighting, which means artillery shells going back and forth for, 7 years after that. And the Americans really leaned on the Ukrainians not to implement the Minsk deals rather than, provide any aid to them in order to help them to implement the deals. So under the deals, there's still probably Russian special operations forces there, certainly pro-Russian allied armed militias in the east of the country there, getting some kind of Russian support. And they have this sort of autonomy. And what they're arguing for is essentially strong federalism, like statehood. I know in America, we invert federalism to mean centralize everything. But what it would mean in another context would be decentralize everything, right? So strong federalism for Iraq means split all the provinces apart. Or in Yemen, split them all apart. Oftentimes that leads to war. Sometimes it can help to prevent one. So in this case, we're talking about giving the far eastern provinces of Ukraine essentially statehood. In American terms, more independence than they had before, but still part of Ukraine. That was the status quo under the peace deals that America wouldn't implement. And that was how it was supposed to remain. And then when there's a combination of factors, especially the continued provocation of announcements by the United States that by the Biden administration that they are determined to bring Ukraine into the NATO military alliance, and Russia drew their red line and said, that's it. Either sign our treaty agreeing to neutrality and to not join NATO and to not bring Ukraine into NATO, and sign a new treaty promising to not put your any future missiles and station any missiles in Ukraine and this kind of thing. The Americans, instead of dealing in good faith and saying, well, look, you're going to lose some influence over the east of the country, but that's kind of already the way the dice is rolled anyway. And instead of saying, well, look, we promised under Bill Clinton that we wouldn't militarize the new NATO nations in the East. And the presidents all along have said up until Bush that it might be a bridge too far to bring Ukraine in. Only the worst hawks wanted to bring Ukraine in if you go back 20 years. And a lot of other credentialed people said we would never go that far. So let's just not bring Ukraine into NATO. Let them have this neutral status. But if you go back to the end of 21 and the beginning of 22, the Biden government's position was to tell the Russians, one, you better not do it or else. And then two, if you do it, we're going to make it tough for you. But that was it. It was all warning, no negotiation. And when the Russians tried to negotiate, and they did try to negotiate in good faith, the Americans would not negotiate in good faith. They basically were snickering. This is going to, and you can find it. It'll be all in the book, but you can find it easily yourself too. Even Hillary Clinton went ranting and raving about this on MSNBC, and they wouldn't stop her because she's Hillary. So they just let her go off dang. And she just went off on what we're going to do is it'll be just like the 1980s when, Rambo 3 helped lure the Russians into Afghanistan. And then we back the Mujahideen, the bad guys, the terrorists from our war, we back them against the Russians to bog them down and bleed them to bankruptcy. Now, in the history of the 1980s, the Afghan war really did help to destroy the Soviet Union. It was one of the straws that broke the camel's back. There's really not much question about that. And that was the origin of Al-Qaeda's policy into luring us into Afghanistan. So they wanted to replicate that same thing against us. And George Bush and Barack Obama and Donald Trump happily obliged them. Although Donald Trump eventually did strike the deal to get us out of there. But he stayed and bombed them for 4 years anyway.
Wow.
But so they think, oh, we're just so clever. We're just going to do that again. Well, look at the consequences of the first Afghan war. It ended up leading to the rise of Al-Qaeda and the terrorist war against us. And then the entire dang terror war, 20 years rampaging across the Middle East since then. Well, what do they think is going to happen this time? And they also cited Syria. I swear to you, they said in the New York Times, this was, I'm 99% sure this was Admiral Stavridis, who would have been Hillary Clinton's Secretary of Defense. If not Michelle Flournoy, maybe he would have been National Security Advisor, but I think he probably would have been SecDef. And he told the New York Times, well, look, we don't know anything about defeating an insurgency. I'll admit that to you. But we sure know how to back one, like we did in Afghanistan and like we did in Syria. Well, like I just said, Afghanistan, I mean, man, this was only literally 2-3 months after America's final humiliating withdrawal and defeat from Afghanistan in September 2021, right? 2-3 months later, they're going, yeah, dude, we're going to set ourselves back on that path again. We're so smart. And then their other example was Syria, where, you know what? You might be too young to remember Rambo 3 and Jimmy Carter and Ronald Reagan's policy in Afghanistan. But you remember Barack Obama in Syria, right? Barack Obama backed the terrorists in Syria until it blew up into the caliphate that took over all of eastern Syria and all of western Iraq, with that guy Baghdadi up on the balcony at the mosque declaring himself the Caliph Ibrahim, divinely anointed ruler of the new Arab caliphate. And, you know, a land the size of Great Britain, and that took Iraq War III to destroy again. It was like if bin Laden himself had been given a state by Bush and Obama in western Iraq. It was unbelievable. The absolute immeasurable catastrophe that was Obama's policy in Syria. And these guys go, yeah, that's what we want to do in Ukraine, because it'll weaken Russia. Russia will have to spend money that they can't afford.
So that's the game here then. It's fund these insurgencies to lure the other nation into a counter strike against them, to bankrupt them or to hurt them financially.
Yep. So that was America's policy with helping to lure Russia or the Soviet Union into Afghanistan in the first place, although that's not really why they invaded. That's why the Americans are trying to provoke them to invade. And that is why the terrorists provoked the United States into invading Afghanistan. It's exactly what they were trying to replicate against us. And then that was, again, what America was trying to replicate, that same policy against Russia in Ukraine this time.
It occurs to me that this would probably be a consequence of printing money as well, because the backing of these insurgencies is not done with hard money, right? It's usually just printed. So,
well, I got to tell you, the black budget for the CIA is tens of billions. It's really, that much is peanuts compared to the overall empire. But the overall empire could never be waged without paper money. I mean, if you want to go down there, the absolute reality is that a gold standard, even a partial gold standard, is a ceiling on government inflation. There's only so much money they can print if they have to redeem it. And so when they decoupled from gold, you know, people say they have this oil standard, which is like, it's a figure of speech, right? It means people have an extra incentive to stock up on dollars so they can buy oil with it or whatever. Right. But this is not exactly the same thing. And they have essentially an unlimited license to print money. And I'd ask you and any of your audience to just think back to Iraq War II, especially, I think is the best example of this, because, you know, as bad as unprovoked as the Libya war was, they just bombed the crap out of them and backed Al-Qaeda terrorists on the ground, and they got away with spending a few tens of billions on that. And then that was about it. Yeah. But Iraq War II was humongous. I mean, Bush spent ultimately like $8 trillion on that thing. Spent 8 years, got 1 million people killed, including 4,500 American GIs and sailors, and another probably 4,500 or so Mercs, and and Marines I left out there. I meant to say airmen and sailors too killed in that thing, and it was this, like we were just sitting there. Iraq was just sitting there and America's just sitting there. And then jerkwad up there in the chair says go and pulls the lever and just starts an aggressive war for no good reason. It was really because that's what Israel wanted was the reason. But like I said, no good reason. And he did this massive war. And they told the American people at the time, this is going to be easy. This is going to be fun. This is going to be free. The Iraqi oil will pay for the entire thing. We'll be in and out of there and it'll be great. And if they had told the American people, oh, we're staying. We're going to build an empire, a basis there. We're going to rule Mesopotamia forever, which didn't work out, but that was their plan. Yeah. And that was why they did stay and wage the war the way they did for so many years, is because that was still their goal. If they had said that that was what it's going to be, and it's going to cost you and your community and your state and this country $8 trillion. Oh, and then at the end, we're going to fail anyway. We're going to turn 2/3 of the country over to the Ayatollah and the other third over to Baghdadi, the bin Ladenite. People would have said, hell no. You know, raise my taxes? You know, pay money, like actual money for this to start a war? Forget it. But what did Bush do? Bush sent people a $300 rebate check. Every taxpayer got, you know, like a welfare payment, right? Like it's the earned income tax credit for poor people, but everybody got one. And then I think the next year it was a $400 check. And the whole thing was just an illusion, right? They printed the money. They borrowed it from China or Korea or whatever. But the point was to make your dad feel like he was getting a dividend check. He was getting a piece of our profit from invading Iraq. When no, they took all that money straight out of his pocket. The whole thing was just a scam. That's right. And you could say the same thing going back to Vietnam and all the way through. That if they had to raise our taxes and pay as you go to wage a world empire, this thing would have been done a long time ago. And which brings us to where are we now? Where the only thing propping up the dollar now is the Chinese buying American debt. They print money to buy American debt to prop up our dollar so we can spend it building up a naval force to threaten them with. And how long do we think that they're going to continue to do that? We got people talking about, oh, no, America, Joe Biden was asked, how can we have a war in Israel and a war in Ukraine and all these things? He's like, this is America, baby. America can do it. Well, the national debt's $30 trillion. We got to borrow and inflate every bit of this. How in the world could he think that, oh, yeah, no, it's nothing? I'm sure you saw you're in this financial stuff. A few months ago, Janet Yellen said, oh, yeah, no, we expect the national debt to get up to $50 trillion by 2030. By 2030? Wow. No, don't you worry about that, though, man. They've, you know, had a meeting and said that this is cool. They know it's going to be fine. Right. That's all of that is to make all of government seem affordable. But the empire is just an extra trillion thrown away every year that we don't need at all. You know, there's even a quote. I don't think I could ever find this again, but there was a great quote of a general. Maybe I could find this somewhere. I bet it was during the Obama years, a general testifying before Congress. And he goes, look, remember the sequester? If you don't do this budget cut, then you can't have that budget, you know, allocation or whatever little bookkeeping thing they were fighting about there in the Congress. And the general goes, listen, Senator, if you want a military that can protect this country, I can do that for a couple of $100 billion. But you want me to be able to respond to any crisis anywhere in the world at a moment's notice and for America's will to prevail, like at all times, anywhere? That's going to cost you. You know, that's what this budget is that we're talking about. It's not the defense budget. This is the world empire budget. If it was just the defense budget, it wouldn't even be a scandal, right? There'd be some corruption in it and we'd be, you know, us abolitionists would be mad. But otherwise, no one would care, right? The fact of the matter is the world empire is driving the country into the ground. The whole project is murder-suicide. Look at what they're doing to us. They call it national security. but they run up a $30 trillion debt. How the hell does that make us secure?
And
we could have an absolute financial complete catastrophe, the collapse of our currency, and total disruption of our society based on it.
If you are a business owner or manager, you should know these three numbers: 36,000, 25, and 1. 36,000 is the number of businesses that have upgraded to NetSuite by Oracle. NetSuite is the #1 cloud financial system, which allows you to streamline accounting, financial management, human resources, and more. NetSuite turns 25 years old this year. That's 25 years of helping businesses do more with less, close their books in days rather than weeks, and to drive down cost. And finally, 1, because your business is one of a kind. So with NetSuite, you get a customized solution for all your key performance indicators in one efficient system with one source of truth. NetSuite is everything you need all in one place. Right now, you can download NetSuite's popular KPI checklist designed to give you consistently excellent performance absolutely free at netsuite.com/whatismoney. That's netsuite.com/whatismoney to get your free KPI checklist. Again, netsuite.com/whatismoney. Forget multivitamins and other supplements. Animal organs are the most nutrient-dense foods on the planet. You can get 100 times more nutrients from organs than you can from muscle meats. But the problem with eating organs is that they are difficult to find in stores, they are difficult to prepare, and even when they are prepared well, they often don't taste great. Thankfully, Heart and Soil Supplements has made consuming organ meats so much easier by providing powderized organs in capsule form. Organ meats include everything your body needs to thrive: vitamins, minerals, peptides, proteins, and growth factors. This is why organ meats were the most prized foods for our ancestors. Fortunately for us, Heart and Soil makes these treasured foods easily accessible. So go to heartandsoil.co today and use discount code BREEDLOVE to get started on your journey to optimal health and vitality. Again, that's heartandsoil.co, discount code BREEDLOVE. Over the past 9 years, I've been going through a pretty serious struggle with my personal health. It started with a sharp pain and stiffness in my hip after a lifting injury, which I later learned was related to some pretty extensive inflammation in my gut. Then I developed an autoimmune issue, and soon I was having joint pain all over, skin irritations, and all kinds of digestive issues. I visited many doctors trying to figure out what was wrong, but none of them were able to help me fix any of my issues. I eventually started to see an energy healer with whom I had some limited success, but it wasn't until I started working with the biohacker Anthony DiClementi last year that I was finally able to start making real progress on my healing journey. Anthony spent a lot of time with me learning about my specific situation and worked with me to adapt a custom health plan to address my needs. Anthony has served as a personal biohacker for celebrities, billionaires, and professional athletes all over the world. Besides helping people like me overcome health issues, Anthony and his world-class medical team also help guys that just want to optimize their cognitive performance, guys that want to pack on some muscle, and guys that just want to get shredded. Anthony keeps a tight book of business and is selective about the clients he brings on. To apply for Anthony's biohacking services, text Breedlove to 847-943-7221. Again, to apply for Anthony's biohacking services, just text Breedlove to 847-943-7221.
And isn't that almost inevitable when we look at the history of empires, though? Because most of them, they get overextended in imperialist campaigns and they go bankrupt and they collapse.
You know, a funny story is there's this book called Tragedy and Hope. You might have heard of it. It's by Carol Quigley, who is Bill Clinton's professor at Georgetown. And it's sort of the conspiracy theory Bible because he has a lot about sort of the secret relationships between the most powerful Americans and Brits during the World Wars era and this kind of thing. And there's lots of good stuff in there. But the title, Tragedy and Hope, is about what you just said.
Mm-hmm.
It's Quigley saying, listen, dum-dums, all empires fall. So know that and then don't do that.
Yeah.
Right? Like your whole job. That's the tragedy is we see this happen over and over again. The hope is that you'll read my book and get it through your head to not let this happen to you, right? To literally be conservative, conserve, right? As it's so funny, man. There's damn Dana Carvey from Saturday Night Live coined the joke of H.W. Bush's phrase. It wouldn't be prudent. It wouldn't be prudent at this juncture to do this, to do that. And it made him sound like he was so conservative. It wouldn't be prudent. Well, that quote is him saying it wouldn't be prudent to ever lift the blockade against Iraq until we're done going back to war against that son of a bitch someday. Yeah, pretty conservative there, George. He, setting us on that path to the destruction in the Middle East back 30 years ago with that nonsense, But what Quigley was saying was, hey, man, instead of you and your idiot son blowing our country's entire wad, fighting Iraq for 30 years, dude, if I came up to you and your family and your neighborhood 40 years ago and said, yeah, when the Cold War with the Soviet Union is over, we're going to go fight Iraq for 30 years. Until we're dead, until we ruin our own country. Yeah. Completely bankrupt. And people would have thought you're crazy. I was crazy. No way that we could be so imprudent as to commit to such a policy. It's so completely nuts. And that was what Quigley was saying. Quigley was saying, read my book, learn it well. Republics thrive. Corrupt, evil empires blow their own brains out along with everybody else. In fact, it's even cooler than that. He says, Western civilization has completely reinvented itself over and over again, from Greece to Rome, and then the Holy Roman Empire, and then eventually with the Renaissance and the Enlightenment and all of these different things, the advent of the New World and the United States and all of these things. And he says, what's cool is the West has been able to reinvent itself over and over again without being destroyed, without dying out. It just kind of adapted and changed. And we've been very, very lucky. But the history of most civilizations ain't that lucky. Yeah. And there's no magic that says that ours has to continue to thrive if we, stop doing the things that make it work, which we have.
Yeah, I want to go back to something you said earlier, right? So the difference between taxation and inflation is basically that taxation is explicit. You get a bill and you got to pay it. Inflation is implicit and it's deniable, right? So governments print money without any democratic approval. And then Biden blames whatever producers for increasing prices, not the Fed for counterfeiting currency.
Right.
Is that the solution to a lot of this? Is like, if it had to be explicit and it couldn't be printed, then people would at least resist, right? When they got the bill from the IRS and said, here's your share of us blowing up Iraq, pay us $80,000 per household or whatever the number was.
Right.
Wouldn't that, I don't know that's a fix, but would it at least fix the incentives or fix the accountability in a way that would cause people to push back against this nonsense?
Yeah, it's not like there's any one magic trick that's going to fix all this, or we could get a Congress to pass a law like that if that wasn't their intent anyway, right? Would be that we're not going to do this anymore. But yes, this is absolutely should be part of our argument as libertarians. That one of the best things about hard money is preventing your government from borrowing themselves into wars where they have no business. And, Jonah Goldberg, who, used to be the editor of the National Review, had a thing where he said the gold standard is crazy and stupid. What if there's a war? Yeah, well, Jonah Goldberg wants war for Israel all the time. Screw him. Let him go join the IDF. You know what he said in Iraq War II when Iraq War II broke out? And they said, why don't you go and fight? You do nothing but monger wars, the editor of the National Review. And he said, hey, listen, I have a wife and kids. Oh, really? Wow. Like all those GIs and Marines that got their legs and their nuts blown off over there didn't have a wife and kids? And Jonah Goldberg don't give a damn about them. He wouldn't risk himself for this country or for Israel ever. But he'll sit here and say, no, we have to have this corrupt, inflationary monetary system so that you can keep dying in wars for this essentially near enemy foreign nation that he has his primary loyalty to.
So a gold standard or a pseudo gold standard at least provides some constraint on the state's capacity to wage war. the petrodollar is not the same. I agree with you, right? The quote unquote black gold standard, because it's not practical to redeem your dollars for oil and put all your oil in your vault, right? Like that doesn't make sense. Gold has a lot more economic density. You could secure it in a way that you can't oil. Oil obviously has a lot of industrial use, et cetera. What are your views on Bitcoin? Because this is a big angle a lot of Bitcoiners talk about, is that gold is great, but gold is physical. And because gold is physical, we have to centralize the custody of it. And when we centralize the custody of it, we end up with a central bank. And we end up with a central bank, we end up with fiat currency, we end up with fiat currency, we end up with endless wars. How do you view the potential of Bitcoin in this context?
I mean, I'm glad it's out there, and I'm glad it's an alternative. And it's a hell of a lot more portable than gold as far as that goes. And I guess my understanding is the mathematical basis of the whole setup is that there is an absolute hard limit on how many can ever be created. I think they're going to get to that in 21 something.
2140. Yeah.
Yeah. But then, so everybody knows that it literally is, somewhat inflationary now, but only in the medium term, I guess in our long term, but still. And I know that they don't create them nearly as quickly as they used to, from compared to back when the thing first started out. Yeah. So, I saw some billionaire, and this is right before the price went way, way down, but then it's gone quite a ways back up again since then anyway. But I saw some billionaire investor on TV, and he was like, man, I got billions in Bitcoin, billions. And the lady was like, what, are you serious? And he goes, let me tell you something, lady. There's a hard limit on the supply, and there's a never-ending growth in demand. And so I'm a bull forever. Out. Like, forget it. And I mean, that makes sense to me that, more and more people want to figure out a way. I mean, people speculate on it. That's one thing. But people also just want a way to pay each other and just stay out of the net of the feds. And I guess if you set it up anonymously enough and you never cash out to your bank account, then, people can just, pass money around and never have to pay capital gains on it, or never have to pay sales tax on it, or never have to whatever, and just circumvent the system that way. So I don't know if it'll ever replace, national government currencies. Yeah. The government will always say that, of course, you can't pay us in Bitcoin, and you have to pay us. So you're going to have to, at some point, you have to cash out and pay them in their own currency. That's going to remain a problem as long as we got a central government. But I mean, the more it frustrates them and the more it makes their currency obsolete, the better, as far as I'm concerned. That's for sure.
My big hope was sort of alluding to my earlier point that if you could at least reduce inflation as a revenue option and force states to explicitly tax people for all this nonsense, then you would create more pushback, right? More resistance to endless wars, et cetera.
And by the way, about inflation is it's not just that they're robbing you all day, which they are. I mean, the endlessly rising prices is just torture. I mean, people act like, oh, geez, prices keep going up. Hey, what's up? Cost of living. Ha, ha, ha. No, man, it's not funny the way that they steal from people. I mean, you're talking about the margin of whether people can afford to stay in their house or their apartment or not, or whether they're living in their car at Walmart, or worse, losing custody of their kids, or, God knows what, consequences for real humans that happen from this. But on top of all of that, it's inflation that causes the boom and the bust cycle.
That's right.
And they always act like this is just a force in nature, that the economy goes up, the economy goes down, the economy goes up, the economy goes down. Or worse, the economy goes humming along, and then it goes down. And it needs to be stimulated back up to humming along again. Oh, man, that's not right. What it is it's the inflationary money makes it seem as though there's more actual wealth available to be invested in projects.
Yes.
And then when it turns out that's not true, it's just like a pyramid scheme going bankrupt.
Yeah.
What do you mean there's not enough money there for the giant project that we started? And I'll just give you an example from when I was a kid. In the neighborhoods around my junior high school, it was like in the woods in the Texas Hill Country, and they had built all of these roads, the mailboxes, and the gutter sewage system and the curbs. And they had started to put some of the foundations down. And then those neighborhoods never got developed for another 10 years after that.
Right.
So what had happened was there was a massive real estate crash. This is the late 80s. There was a massive real estate crash. Well, what had happened before that? There had been a massive real estate bubble. And what had happened before that? There had been a massive crash. And what had been before that? A massive bubble.
Yeah.
Right. It was the 70s was worse than a bubble, right? The 70s was just stagflation, which is complicated, high unemployment, high inflation rate, and just terrible. Yeah. Then the Federal Reserve under Paul Volcker raised interest rates through the roof. Why? To deliberately put the entire country, the entire economy, and the people of the country's economic life in a stranglehold. Because as long as they're taking loans out, they're multiplying the currency in circulation. In fact, he's mad at Ronald Reagan for cutting taxes right when he's trying to suffocate the economy. Reagan's stimulating it. And he's going, stop it. I'm trying to cause a terrible, terrible, terrible recession. It's the only way to stop the inflation. And it worked. And then he resigned. And then what they do? They brought in Greenspan, who put his foot on the floor again, and they just inflated another bubble. Crashed in 87. And then there was another bubble that crashed after Iraq War I in 92, and another in, a little bit of one in 97. And then everybody knows the terrible crash of 2000, and then the absolute catastrophe of 2008. And then we were due for a crash anyway. You might remember Donald Trump going, oh man, I hope there ain't a crash before my reelection. You know what I mean? Keep printing that money. But then what happened? The COVID came, and the governors, led by the president, locked the whole damn country down. So the governors, in the name of the lockdown, they acted like Paul Volcker. And they forced this massive and horrifying recession. Not in order to force a recession, but just over their lockdown thing. And really, I think, to jam him, to make him the president of the most miserable America possible in the run-up to, his reelection potential reelection in 2020. But in any case, but how do they get away with locking the whole country down? Well, they had to bribe everyone, but especially big business, with trillions of dollars of new stimulus money, you could call it. So that at the exact same time that they were busting the economy, they were booming it right back up again with all that inflationary money that they sent out to companies and to individuals. And that wasn't even the Fed. That was just Congress writing checks on an empty bank account, right? On just brand new money entering circulation by the trillions and trillions. At one point, they said, I think over at Mises, they said, well, and I asked McMakin about this, and he said it was very complicated to measure, but there were some calculations that were saying like something like 2/3 of all American dollars that had ever been created were created in 2020, which led to this, of course, this massive dislocation in the economy, massive bubble in housing, and meaning, again, poor people forced to live outside now as they're priced right out of a place to live indoors. I don't know what all, stock market bubbles and whatever all bubbles. Of course, the lockdowns created a massive, like, walking zombie of commercial real estate. Yeah. We have empty office buildings by the zillions. I don't know the numbers, but it's incredible amounts of empty office buildings all around the country, where when they locked everything down for the COVID and people went home and decided they could work from home, they never came back again. And so they're facing already a massive correction there, but there's a worse one coming, man. Those prices, there's only so much that can be done to prop them up. Those prices are coming down still. And I don't know exactly about in my town, in Austin, maybe not, but in a lot of other cities, it's going to be really bad still. That. And so right now, what are they doing? They started cutting the rates because inflation got so bad. They started raising the rates because inflation got so bad, they kind of start to panic. But then they're like, we don't want to cause a crash because that'll get Trump elected. And they don't want that. So it's the most political and obvious thing in the world. And now they're going to hold steady and probably even start cutting rates in the coming months to go ahead, because they figure, you know what? What hurts Biden worse? Murderous inflation or the disastrous crash that's the only solution to the murderous inflation? Pick your poison. Which one is worse for his poll results? That's what's going to determine the interest rate. I mean, that's how completely rigged our economy is. The very price of the money that we use is that political, and that completely, and wage as irresponsibly as they use our military, right? It's, again, Joe Biden has been in the Senate and a leader in the Senate since the 70s, right? Like it might as well have been him this whole time. You know, he was riding shotgun with Ronald Reagan on a bunch of his policies all through the 80s. He was Bill Clinton's and George Bush's buddy and Bill Clinton's buddy in the 90s, George Bush's buddy and Barack Obama's vice president in the 2000s. And then now, right? Like it might as well have been President Biden and Vice President McCain this whole time. It's one unbroken policy that these guys were all involved in and all supported this whole time. That's who's, you know, brilliant, responsible hands we've been in.
But underlying
like this,
all of this, as you said, I mean, it's monetary policy that then enables all of this insane policy making in general. And what you're describing there with the money, Mises's Austrian business cycle theory, right? You print money, it creates the illusion of more goods and capital than there is in actuality. And then eventually the market figures out, oh, wait, it's not there. You get a crash, all these unfinished projects. And that, it seems to be like a primary problem in the world. And it's getting worse, right? We print 700 billion in 2008. We print 6 to 8 trillion in 2020. It's, you know, an order of magnitude larger each time. If I could ask you a question about actually the nature of money. So one of the things, actually, the guy you just said that mentioned Bitcoin, you know, there's a hard cap on it. Therefore, demand goes up forever. I'm holding it forever, basically. I have noticed that seems to be a strange thing about money, that it's one of these commodities that the integrity of the supply actually drives demand, because if the supply can't be debased, then it's a good savings tool, right? That's why gold was a good savings tool, is a good savings tool, because it has an inflexible supply. But that's just describing like an aspect of money or why people choose a certain money. The namesake of this show is the What is Money show. And I found it to be a very deep question. People have a lot of different answers to it. So if you don't mind, I would love to hear you answer the question, what is money?
Oh, well, I mean, I think it's just a commonly accepted means of exchange, right? I mean, if they, or what is currency, or, you know, if that's the same question, it's essentially, you know, I saw a funny thing where these socialists are always putting up these ridiculous, most primitive memes about like, oh, if everybody only grew their own food in their own garden and then traded it with each other once a week at the potluck and whatever, and then everybody would have a thing. And then Bob Murphy always has something hilarious to say. And he's like, yeah. And then like if some people had big yards and they produced like way more food than they could give away to people, and in a way that they could keep track of what they were trading, maybe you could come up with some sort of ledger system where you would, right? Like, in other words, these socialists are like, oh, wouldn't it be paradise if, and their economic thinking is literally like on absolute step one of caveman economics, right? And Bob is like taking them just to the next step. Like, what if two neighbors both had a garage sale and there was so many items, they just like started writing it down, who owed how much of some kind of unit of something for everything else, right? Like that's where money comes from. And, you know, I guess credit is the same way too. I'll give you 2 chickens now, but you owe me 3 cows later or whatever. That's not a very good deal, but you know what I mean?
Yeah. So what, the reason I think it's a deep, interesting philosophical question, it is, sure, we can throw out the very standard universal medium of exchange answer. But I've found it to be, it sort of bridges a lot of gaps, right? So obviously there's a physical instantiation of money in the case of gold, right? It's a metal rock, but there's also this social construction around it, right? We ascribe a monetary premium to gold because it gives us certain properties that make it saleable and marketable. And it's all, I mean, there's a lot of ways we could go here. It also seems to be, like you were talking about the black gold earlier with the petrodollar, money and energy seem to be closely related. Like it's a claim on human energy. And then if it's not pegged to something like gold or like oil, there's not enough reservation demand for the money for it to subsist. And so, and the other thing that's interesting about money is that we think in terms of it. So it's almost like a language, you know, the price signal coordinates the allocation of capital in the world.
Thanks to my friends at Swan Bitcoin for supporting the show. Swan sponsored the Sailor series, and I appreciate their support from the very beginning of the What is Money show, and I'm happy to welcome them back. Swan has grown a lot since then. They've built a full-service, Bitcoin-centric financial services company with several different offerings. With the Swan app, you can set up instant and recurring Bitcoin buys, and with this, you can get started at swan.com/breedlove. Swan also enables clients in the US to hold Bitcoin directly in an IRA account, so you can hold Bitcoin in a tax-advantaged way. Get started at swan.com/IRA. If you're looking to buy more than $100,000 worth of Bitcoin, check out Swan Private. You'll get concierge support for buy execution, retirement accounts, inheritance and estate planning, and access to exclusive events, research, and other content. Get started at swan.com/private. Swan Institutional provides financial services to institutions, including Bitcoin-backed lending, asset management, principal investments, Bitcoin services for financial advisors, and Bitcoin mining operations. For those new to Bitcoin, I recommend checking out Swan's Welcome to Bitcoin course at swan.com/welcome. So go to swan.com/breedlove today to get started on your Bitcoin buying journey. Are you sick of being robbed by politicians through inflation and endless money printing? If so, you need to be at Bitcoin 2024 in Nashville, Tennessee on July 25th through 27th. As the largest Bitcoin and fintech conference in the world, Bitcoin 2024 stands as a beacon of monetary freedom, a glimmer of hope amongst a darkening macroeconomic backdrop. Top speakers, companies, and thought leaders from across the industry will convene in Nashville to look ahead to the next year and beyond. I will be there, and Bitcoin conferences like this have become my favorite place to socialize since becoming a Bitcoiner. Ticket prices will increase soon. Get your tickets now and secure your spot at this game-changing event. So go to b.tc/conference and use discount code BREEDLOVE to sign up for the Bitcoin 2024 conference. Again, that's b.tc/conference, discount code BREEDLOVE.
Maybe I could ask you this then. What, if you were going to address all of these problems, some of these problems that we've talked about today, do you think addressing the corruption of money, or if we wanted to say the monopolization of money, the centralization of money, would that be a main contributor to solving these problems, or is there something even more significant in your opinion?
Well, you know, I mean, there's 1,000 branches and you can hack at them all day or strike the root, you know, like they say.
What's the root?
Is that website still there? Strike the root? Used to have good stuff. Well, the state itself, right? Like I spent many years since probably the early 90s or mid 90s at least, trying to get people to read Jekyll Island, right? And hate the Fed.
Same here, yeah.
But ultimately it was the Congress that created the Fed. Who the hell are they? What gives them the right to create a Congress? What gives George Washington the right to a Fed? And what gives George Washington the right to create a Congress? I mean, the whole thing is bogus. Yeah. The question is, like, you know, where you want to call, which battle you want to fight. And there are libertarians who, you know, quite rightly, and whatever, with a lot of value in it, I think, probably focus on arguing pure libertarian theory and hoped for ultimate libertarian outcomes in the complete absence of the state. I don't think you can ever really catch me making an argument for I really want the government to do something. Very rarely.
Mm-hmm.
Mostly I want them to only just stop. At the same time, my arguments are not based on ultimately, well, yeah, that's why everybody should be a libertarian like me. And that's why we need a no state solution for everything and everywhere. You know what I mean? Old Pete Quinones would say, get out of that Ancapistan in your head and deal with the real world. And I've kind of always been like that. I mean, I'm basically guess it's fair to say, a protege of Justin Raimondo, who was a protege of Murray Rothbard. And, Rothbard was the libertarian theory guy, but he was also very grounded in real world politics. And Justin, he would write about libertarianism, of course, and from a libertarian point of view. But the point of his article was always, George Bush is supporting this player in power in this place with this result and whatever. And there wasn't always some libertarian morality tale in every story, right? It was just, we shouldn't be doing this. This is wrong. This is going to lead to that result, whatever. You shouldn't have to be a libertarian to read it and understand it. And it's not a call to libertarianism every time the guy puts a pen to paper either. You know what I mean? That's not the point. The point is, so now there are people who really do just focus on economics or really do just focus on libertarian theory or really focus on, whatever different aspects. And that's all fine for them. I'm not like saying anything against others, but I'm saying for my own preference, I don't believe in the state. I ain't for it, but I do know that it's going to be around the day I die and that the whole damn world is lousy with nation states. And that's how the system is now. And, I'll argue against its worst excesses first and its very existence second, after I'm done with the worst successes, I guess.
Have you read The Sovereign Individual, and do you subscribe to the economics of violence thesis, if so?
No, I don't think so. Who wrote that?
Is co-authored, and James Dale Davison is one of the co-authors. The second co-author escapes me at the moment.
I don't think so.
Yeah, it's just interesting to think about. It's a lot to think about, but I've had to sum it up. It's like the more difficult it is to project power across a large space, then the more decentralized society tends to be. So if you imagine people like living in the mountains, pretty hard to establish an empire over people in the mountains. So they tend to be pretty decentralized, in terms of power distribution. And so I don't know how we curb the state, but I think that my hope, at least, is about, with Bitcoin, cryptography, other things like this, that we can at least make statism less profitable, make coercion less profitable, give people a peaceful alternative to holding their purchasing power in dollars that's printed to use to wage all these wars, et cetera, et cetera. So that's why I'm focused on Bitcoin. And I think a lot of Bitcoiners are as well. But I do hear you. Like it's a weird thing, right? We need to explore the ideals of libertarianism so we have something to aim at, but we also have to keep our feet in the real world and deal with it as it is. So,
well, everybody's got to pick their battles. I mean, I think Bitcoin is a perfectly great battle to fight. And there's a lot of them. I was doing some Libertarian Party stuff in Utah last year, a couple of years ago. And I met a guy, he showed us this movie that they had made. I feel terrible now. I can't remember the guy's name anymore. But he had made this movie about this great libertarian in the 1970s who was this awesome fighter against the IRS. And then he had tragically died of cancer before the end of the decade, I think, back in the 70s. I'm so sorry I can't remember his name. It's on the tip of my tongue. There's a coolest little documentary there. And, this guy, I think he had started out as like an Ayn Rand guy or something like that. And then he just ended up like Mr. Anti-IRS and I couldn't tell you the story, but he just whooped their ass 100 times and made himself such a major problem for them. And then, of course, was hugely instructive in the lives of all these other libertarians. They're like, that's how you do it, man. Get out there and fight them bastards. You know what I mean? And that kind of thing. And so, much as I hate the IRS, and you know what? Don't get me started on that this week. But that was his focus. He decided that he wanted to do. And I think it's the same thing with everything. There used to be this guy, Eric Peters, I think, maybe still around. But he wrote a column for Lou Rockwell just about government regulation of cars and trucks, how much he hates it and how wrong and horrible it all is, and how they're the reason that XYZ things about your car that you hate and whatever is all because of government regulation and this and that. And that was just his thing. He's a car guy and he's an anti-government guy. And so blam, let's chocolate and peanut butter. He's going to do this. That's his thing that he's best on. And of course, we got a million gun guys where that's the freedom that they prioritize the most, is he ain't taking our rifles away. And they're speaking for a lot of people who that's not exactly their issue, but they also agree. You know what I mean? So just the same way, there are a lot of those gun guys who are anti-war, but they're going to let me carry that weight for them. You know what I mean? This is kind of trading off. Yeah. So it's the division of labor in the market of anti-government activity, man. You know, you do your part. You don't need to second guess it. You know what I mean? Yeah. The point thing is obviously, first of all, it's good for people, and if you're doing it right, it's be very good for you too. So.
Yeah, no, I think that's a good call to action, right? Just figure out what skill set you can bring to bear and then match that up with advancing individual human freedom in some way.
Yeah. That's what Ron Paul told me, man. Years ago, he says, oh, I know. It was the first time I ever interviewed him. I interviewed him in person at the Libertarian Party National Convention in Atlanta in 2004. And I'm like, oh, man, I'm going to interview Ron Paul. I'm all nervous. I don't know what to ask him. I got all these questions, but then what if I need one more question? I don't know. And so I asked Karen Katowski, who's the great, heroic Pentagon whistleblower who told the truth about the evil neocons and how they lied us into war for Israel back in 2003. And she was there. And I asked her, hey, Karen, what would you ask him? And she goes, oh, well, I guess I would say, geez, if there's only ever one Ron Paul in the Congress, then how doomed are we? What are we going to do? You know? So I did ask him that. And then he said, look, a few years ago, which at that time is, 15 years ago, we thought that the Soviet Union was going to last into the new century. We knew it was doomed eventually, but geez, we did not think it was going to be done by the end of the decade. And it was just gone. All Eastern Europe set free from Soviet rule, and South Asia too. And so it's really not your job to go around predicting the worst. It's your job to keep teaching people about liberty and keep teaching people the truth about what the government is doing that they shouldn't be doing. And you just leave all the predicting to somebody else. You just do the work and hope for the best and whatever. So for me, I'm a radio guy, so he was talking to me. You just keep telling the truth. For other people, it's you keep helping people invest wisely. And for other people, it's you keep shooting, teaching people how to shoot straight and whatever it is, that is your role in the thing, You got to decide. And people would always say to Ron Paul, because he's our greatest hero, right? So we always say to him, what do I do? What should I do? And he would always say, you got to figure that out and then do that. You know what I mean? He would say, get out there, boy, and do, but he wouldn't tell you what to do. Yeah. That's got to be your choice. But damn freedom. Right, you got to do something, don't you?
Yeah. Yeah, that's the freedom, right? You got to figure it out for yourself. And I think I like the analogy or the mention of the Soviet Union and its unexpected collapse, because there is this gradually then suddenly element, right?
Yeah.
There's decades where nothing happens and then weeks where decades happen, and you don't know when those moments are coming. But if you do the work and you're prepared and you're matching your skill sets to the market, then, hopefully you'll be in a good position when the time comes.
Yep.
So Scott, man, I really appreciate you coming on. This has been very fun. You're a great speaker, and thank you for doing what you do, matching your skill set to the market and advancing the enterprise of human freedom. Where can people find you on the internet?
Okay, I'm at scotthorton.org. I got 6,000 interviews for you there, going back to 2003. And then I'm the editorial director of Antiwar.com, which is the most important project on the internet. And then also I'm the director of the Libertarian Institute, which is a great bunch of writers and podcasters and everything you need there, libertarianinstitute.org. And check out my books at any of those sites as well.
Scott, thank you so much.
Absolutely. Thank you for having me.